Vivid verses.
I've always believed that how a man handles pressure tells you everything about him. Not the pressure of deadlines or difficult negotiations. Those are almost mechanical once you've trained yourself properly. I mean the particular pressure that comes from someone who knows you, someone who has studied your rhythms and decided, at some point you're not yet aware of, to use that knowledge against you. My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 34 years old, and I run a mid-sized logistics consultancy called Hartwell Solutions out of an office building on Carver Street in the city of Brenton, where the winters come early and the business community is small enough that your reputation follows you like a shadow. I built Hartwell over 6 years from a two-person operation in a shared workspace to a firm of 22 people with contracts across 3 regions. I don't say this to impress anyone. I say it because the discipline required to build something like that becomes habitual. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop assuming and start observing. Those habits don't clock out when the office lights go off. Her name was Cassandra Vale. Cassie to most people. She was 31, worked in brand strategy for a firm called Polaris Creative on the north side of Brennan, and she was, without question, one of the most naturally intelligent people I'd encountered. We met at a dinner hosted by mutual friends, the Hargrove couple, Owen and Priya, who had a habit of assembling interesting people around their long oak dining table and letting the conversation run wherever it wanted. Cassie had arrived in a dark green dress, argued convincingly about supply chain ethics over the lamb course, and made me laugh twice before the dessert came out. I asked for her number before we left. We dated for 8 months. The first 5 were, by any honest measure, good. She was sharp and funny, and she didn't perform either of those things. They were just how she moved through the world. She had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to defend them, which I respected. We traveled once up a long weekend to the coast at Linden Bay, and I remember thinking on the drive back that I was in the kind of easy comfort that takes a long time to find. Something shifted around month 6. I noticed it the way you notice a change in air pressure before a storm, not the storm itself, just a subtle wrongness in the atmosphere. Small things at first. A comment at Owen and Priya's place again, a monthly dinner they hosted, where Cassie said something about a decision I'd made at work. Specifically, that I'd turned down a large contract because the client's ethics didn't meet my standards, and framed it as naivety. Adrian's very principled, she told the table, with a half-smile that turned the word into something soft and slightly foolish, sometimes to his own detriment. I didn't react to the table. I filed the moment away and addressed it that evening, directly and without drama. That felt dismissive, I told her, in front of people whose opinions I respect. She apologized, said she was just being playful. I accepted it and moved on. The next instance came 10 days later at a drinks gathering hosted by her colleague Farah at a wine bar called Coppa Leaf on the eastern side of Brennan's commercial quarter. Cassie made a joke about my obsessive scheduling habits while I was standing 3 feet away, and the small cluster of her colleagues laughed politely. Again, not vicious, but pointed enough to land. Pointed enough to position me as the slightly rigid, slightly comedic supporting character in her social performance. I pulled her aside within the hour. "That's twice now," I said. "I like it to stop." She looked surprised, as though she'd genuinely forgotten the previous conversation. "You're being sensitive," she said. "People know I'm joking." "I know what you mean it to be," I said. "I'm telling you how it lands." She let it go without a real resolution, and I noted that too. Here's what I understood. Even then, some people test you not out of cruelty, but out of anxiety. They poke at the structure of a relationship to see how solid it is. I gave Cassie the benefit of that interpretation for longer than I probably should have, because the rest of our dynamic still had genuine warmth in it. When it was just the two of us, she was attentive and engaged. She asked good questions, and remembered the details of things I'd mentioned weeks earlier. That version of her was real. I'm certain of it. But the public version was becoming something else. By the start of week 7 of this pattern, it had happened at 4 separate social events. Each time I addressed it clearly and without hostility. Each time she minimized it. "You're so serious," or "everyone knows I'm teasing," or my personal favorite, "This is just how I show affection." I am not, by nature, a man who issues ultimatums carelessly. But I'm also not a man who confuses patience with tolerance of ongoing disrespect. At this point, they're different things, and I knew which one I was practicing. I sat her down properly. Not after a party, not in the heat of a reaction, but on a quiet Sunday afternoon at my apartment on Dunmore Terrace, with coffee on the table and no particular time pressure on either of us. "Cassie," I said, "I want to have a direct conversation, and I'd like you to actually hear it." She sat across from me, legs tucked under her on the armchair, and nodded. "Over the past several weeks, you've made dismissive comments about me at social events. I've raised it with you every time. You've apologized once and minimized it the other times. I'm telling you clearly now, this needs to stop. Not because I'm wounded by it. I'm not, but because I won't be in a relationship where I'm being publicly undermined. That's a line for me. I need to know if you understand that." She was quiet for a moment. Then something crossed her face that I couldn't fully read. Not guilt, not quite defiance. Something more calculated. "I hear you," she said. "Do you understand the line?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I do." I believed her. Or rather, I gave her the opportunity to prove she meant it, which is a different thing. She didn't mean it. The following week, she made a comment at a birthday dinner for her friend Tatum, a small gathering of maybe 8 people at a restaurant called Birchwood Table on Callaway Lane. That was the sharpest yet. Tatum had asked me about Hartwell, about the growth trajectory, and I'd given an honest answer about where we were and where I wanted to be in 3 years. Cassie, from across the table, said, "He'll still be planning it in 3 years. Adrian's better at the idea than the follow-through." The table went quiet for half a second. Tatum looked briefly uncomfortable. I looked at Cassie. She held my gaze for a moment and then looked away, reaching for her wine glass. I didn't say anything at the table. I finished the evening with composure, engaged the other guests, contributed to the conversation. On the drive home, I told Cassie that we'd talk tomorrow, and I said it in a tone that made it clear the conversation was not optional. She nodded and looked out the window. The next day, I told her plainly that she had crossed the line I'd drawn, that this was now a pattern I'd addressed multiple times, and that I was losing confidence that she was willing or able to change it. "You're making too big a deal of this," she said. "I've given you fair warning," I said. "Multiple times. You've ignored it. That tells me something. It tells you I'm comfortable enough with you to joke around in public," she said. "No," I said. "It tells me you're comfortable enough to disrespect me in public. Those aren't the same thing." She left my apartment that afternoon without real resolution, and for the first time, I began the internal accounting that I do when I'm deciding whether something has run its course. I'm not impulsive about this kind of calculation. I take my time. I'll lay out what I know, what I've observed, what I've attempted, and what has come of those attempts. By any reasonable measure, the evidence was not encouraging, but I hadn't yet fully decided. And then the video arrived. It was a Thursday evening, around 9 o'clock, when my phone lit up with a message from a contact named Brett Okafor, a friend of mine who ran in a wider social circle that overlapped with Cassie's professional world. Brett and I went back years. We played in the same recreational football league for 3 seasons. The kind of friendship built on occasional dinners and the reliable comfort of knowing someone well without being in constant contact. The message said, "Saw something you probably need to see. Sending because I want to know. No pressure on what you do with it." The video was shaky, clearly shot on someone's phone at a party I didn't recognize. Cassie was in the frame, seated on a couch with two women I didn't know, and she was several drinks into the evening by the look of it. The audio was slightly muffled, but clear enough. One of the women was asking her about our relationship, asking why she kept winding me up. Cassie laughed. It was a loose, unguarded laugh, not her usual controlled social laugh. "It's a strategy," she said, gesturing vaguely with her glass. "If I keep him a little off balance, a little uncertain, he gets more attentive, more invested." The woman pressed her. "Does it work?" Cassie snorted. "Not on him. He just pushes back. Every single time. It's actually kind of annoying." She said this last part with something between admiration and genuine frustration. The video ended there. I watched it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the desk and sat with what I'd just seen for a good 5 minutes. Let me tell you what I was thinking, because it's worth accounting for. I wasn't surprised. That's the honest answer. The behavioral pattern I'd observed over weeks had an internal logic, and the video had simply provided the explanation. When you've been watching someone's behavior carefully enough, the revelation of their motive doesn't feel like a shock. It feels like a key turning in a lock you already knew was there. The click is satisfying more than anything else. What I processed next was more interesting. She'd said it herself. It's not working on him. She'd admitted, to these women at a party, that her strategy was failing. That should have deflated the whole enterprise. A rational person would have course-corrected weeks ago. But she hadn't. She'd escalated, which meant the behavior had become either habitual or it had shifted motive. Maybe it was no longer about the strategy working. Maybe now it was about not backing down. That's a more complicated version of the same problem, and it doesn't improve anything. If anything, it worsens the long-term outlook, because you're no longer dealing with someone executing a misguided tactic. You're dealing with someone who has invested their pride in a pattern of behavior regardless of its effectiveness. I texted Brett back, "Appreciate it. Genuinely. I'll handle it." He replied, "I know you will." I sat quietly for another 10 minutes, finishing my coffee, and by the time the cup was empty, the decision was made. Not in anger. I want to be precise about that, because anger would have been legitimate here, and I still didn't feel it. Not really. What I felt was something closer to clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you've been uncertain about a direction, and then the road simply becomes obvious. Cassie and I were done. Not because I was hurt. Not because the strategy had worked or failed. But because I'd drawn a clear line, watched it crossed repeatedly, and now had incontrovertible evidence that the crossing was not accidental but engineered. There's nothing to negotiate with after that. There's only the question of how you exit, and I knew exactly how I intended to do it. I called her the next morning and asked her to meet me at a cafe called Groundwork on Fenwick Road, a place we'd been together a dozen times. Neutral ground, public enough that the conversation would stay measured, private enough that it could be real. She arrived looking like she'd been preparing for an argument. There was a guardedness in her posture that I recognized, shoulders slightly forward, chin level. She'd sensed something coming. I waited until we both had coffee in front of us. "I'm ending things," I said. No preamble. Preamble gives the impression that you might be persuaded out of it. She blinked. "What?" "I've addressed the public comments multiple times. They've continued. I've drawn a clear line, and it's been crossed consistently. I'm not interested in continuing a relationship where that's the pattern." She opened her mouth and then closed it. "Then, you're doing this over a few jokes?" "I'm doing this over a documented, repeated pattern of public disrespect that I addressed directly and consistently, and that continued anyway. The jokes are the symptom. This is overreacting," she said. Her voice had an edge now. "Adrian, this is a massive overreaction." "I disagree," I said quietly, "and it's my decision to make." Something shifted in her expression. I'd seen this before in negotiations that weren't going the way the other party expected. The moment when minimizing doesn't work and they recalibrate. Is this because of something someone told you? She asked. I noted the question. Interesting. She was already triangulating, trying to find the external cause because she wasn't willing to locate it internally. This is because of what I've experienced directly and addressed directly, I said. Multiple times. She tried a few more angles. She told me I was rigid. She told me I took myself too seriously. She told me that a man with more confidence wouldn't be so rattled by a bit of teasing. Each of these was calibrated to find a soft spot, and I watched them pass without impact, the way you watch stones skipped across water that's too deep to disturb. I think you should take some time before. I've had time, I said. This wasn't impulsive. I've been patient and direct, and the pattern didn't change. I wish you well, Cassie. I genuinely do. I left money on the table for both coffees, stood up, and walked out. Not dramatically, just calmly, the way you leave a meeting when the agenda has been completed. I knew what was coming next because I understand how these things work. When a relationship ends and one party has been doing something they know is wrong, they face a choice: own it or redirect. Owning it requires a particular kind of courage that not everyone has. Redirecting is much easier, and it plays well with a sympathetic audience. Within 4 days, the narrative reached me through the usual channels. Priya Hargrove texted to check in. She'd heard from Cassie that things had ended badly and that I'd been cold and critical throughout the relationship. Farah, the colleague from Polaris Creative, apparently had a version in which I'd been emotionally unavailable and had ended things out of nowhere. Tatum, from the birthday dinner, had posted something vague on her private social account about standing by friends who'd been made to feel small by people who should have protected them. I read each of these reports the same way I'd read a competitor's market analysis, with interest but without personal investment. This was predictable. I'd expected it. Cassie was smart enough to know that the best defense against a reputation problem is a preemptive narrative, and she'd moved fast. The question everyone who mattered would eventually ask was, why did it end? I'd already decided how to answer that question, and I decided it before the video, which is important. The video was not a weapon I intended to deploy. It was information. There's a difference. Priya called me 2 days after a text, which I appreciated. She was the kind of person who preferred a real conversation to a series of messages. I'm not trying to mediate, she said. I just want to understand what happened, if you're willing to share. Of course, I said. We weren't compatible, Priya. Turns out we had different ideas about how to treat each other in public, and I wasn't willing to accept the version on offer. She's saying you were difficult. I was consistent, I said. There's a version of events where those two things look the same from outside. Priya was quiet for a moment. She's perceptive, which is one of the reasons I've always respected her. Was there anything specific? There was, I said, and I'll show it to you if you'd like to understand the full picture. Not to lobby for your opinion. I don't need a verdict. But you've been a friend to both of us, and I think you deserve the actual information. I sent her the video that evening. I didn't add commentary. I didn't frame it dramatically. I sent it with a single line. This is what I was dealing with. She called me the next morning. Oh, she said, that was it. Just that one syllable, carrying everything it needed to carry. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I said. She's your friend too, and whatever happened between she and I doesn't have to change that. I appreciate you telling me, Priya said, and I appreciate how you told me. That was the template. When Owen called separately to check in, he and Priya operated that way, gathering information independently and then comparing notes, which was a dynamic I'd always found quietly admirable. I had the same conversation, offered the same video, delivered it the same way. Brett, who'd sent me the video originally, was already in possession of the full picture. He'd seen it unfold from his own vantage point. You're handling this better than anyone I know would, He told me over drinks at a place called the Alcott on Harrison Street, a narrow bar with good whiskey and the kind of low lighting that made conversations feel appropriately contained. "There's nothing to handle," I said. "It's over. She'll tell her version. I'll tell mine to people who ask directly and matter to me. Everyone else gets the short version, which is, we weren't compatible. I wish her well." Brett considered this. "You know, most people won't believe the short version is the whole story." "They're right," I said. "But most people don't need the whole story. And the ones who do will ask." He raised his glass slightly. I raised mine. The weeks that followed had a particular texture. Brenton's professional community is, as I mentioned, relatively small, and news travels through it efficiently. I'd had enough experience watching reputations form and dissolve in this city to know that how you behave in the aftermath of a public narrative about you is more revealing than almost anything else. I went about my work. Hartwell had a contract renewal with a logistics firm called Castlepath Partners, and I put my attention there. I had lunch with a client named Helen Marsh at a restaurant called The Vantage on Prospect Boulevard, and it went well. I attended a dinner that Owen and Priya hosted, the first social event I'd seen them at since everything. I didn't avoid the room or perform lightness. I was simply myself, which is always the least complicated option. Cassie wasn't there, which may have been deliberate on Priya's part, or may have been Cassie's own choice. Either way, it was fine. What I noticed over those weeks was something that I found genuinely interesting. The people who came to me seeking the full story and received it consistently seemed more settled than the ones who'd only received the short version and try to fill in the gaps themselves. Narrative ambiguity, I've come to understand, is actually more socially unsettling than the truth. People will construct a story whether you give them one or not. The only variable is how accurate it is. The people I'd chosen to give the video to, Priya, Owen, and two other close mutual friends named Paul and Grace Linden who'd asked directly, never seemed to share it further. I hadn't asked them not to, but there's a natural restraint that comes with being trusted with something private, and they honored it. I'd chosen correctly. Among the wider circle who'd only heard second or third-hand accounts, Cassie's narrative had more traction because she was the one actively managing it, and I wasn't. But active management of a narrative only sustains a certain amount of weight before the inconsistencies start to show. People who knew us both kept running into the simple fact that I wasn't acting like someone who'd been in the wrong. I wasn't avoiding mutual friends. I wasn't speaking bitterly. I wasn't seeking validation or coalition. I was just present, measured, unchanged. It's a peculiar form of evidence, but it's evidence nonetheless. About 6 weeks after the breakup, I ran into Tatum at a coffee shop called Ember and Grain near the Carver Street office. She'd been firmly in Cassie's corner from the beginning, which was her right as a friend, and I held nothing against her for it. She saw me first and looked like she was calculating whether to acknowledge me. I nodded, and she came over. "How are you?" she asked, with the slightly careful tone of someone operating with incomplete information. "Doing well," I said. "You? Good." A pause. "I wasn't sure if you want to talk to me." "Why wouldn't I?" I said, and I meant it. She considered this. "I heard things about how you were." "I'm sure you did," I said pleasantly. "I take it face value or not, depending on what your own experience of me has been." She looked at me for a moment. Something was working behind her eyes. "You never said anything bad about her," she said. "I know people who asked you." "There wasn't anything useful to say," I said. "We didn't work. That's a human scale story, not a scandal." She nodded slowly. "Then, I think I might have jumped to some conclusions." "That's a fair thing to do when a friend is upset," I said. "It doesn't require an apology." She left the coffee shop looking, if I'm reading people correctly, somewhat less certain of the version she'd been operating with. I didn't feel any particular satisfaction about that. I just noted it. The truth has a way of finding its level like water. You don't need to pour it anywhere. You just need to not block it. Paul Linden called me about 2 months after everything had concluded. Paul is a physician, meticulous, low drama, the kind of person who accumulates credibility because his judgment is reliably sound. He'd asked about the breakup early on, received the video from me, and hadn't raised it since. His call felt deliberate. "I want to tell you something," he said, "because I think you'll want to know, and because I think you handled this correctly, and that deserves to be said." "Go ahead," I said. "I had dinner with the Hargroves last week. A few people were there, some of Cassie's crowd too. Her name came up. Some of what she'd said about you, early on, got retold. And then someone, I don't know who started it, but someone said they'd heard that you'd been nothing but composed about the whole thing, that you hadn't said a word against her publicly, that you just called it incompatibility." He paused. "The room's view of the situation changed," he said. "Not dramatically, not all at once, but I watched it happen. People started to do the math. People generally do," I said. "The video helped too," he said, "among the people who saw it. But honestly, Adrian, your behavior did more than the video. The video told people what you did. Your behavior told people who you are." I thought about that for a moment. There's a version of that observation that could become self-congratulatory, and I had no interest in it. But as a piece of strategy, which is, I think, what Paul was really telling me, it was accurate. Restraint in the aftermath of being wronged is so uncommon that it functions as a signal. People notice it precisely because they expect the opposite. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. "You'd have arrived here anyway," Paul said, "with or without the call." He wasn't wrong, but the call was still good to receive. I've thought about Cassie with some regularity in the months since. Not in a way that's heavy or unresolved. More the way you think about any complicated experience that taught you something about how people work. What I keep returning to is the admission in the video. It's not working on him. She'd identified, correctly, that her strategy was failing. She continued anyway. And I've come to think that this reveals something important about why people do what they do in relationships. It's rarely as rational as it seems from outside. The strategy she described, destabilizing me to increase my investment, may have worked on someone before me. That's the most charitable interpretation, that she'd learned it somewhere, it had been effective, and she'd reached for it reflexively. The miscalculation was that it required a specific kind of target, someone whose self-worth was sufficiently fragile that uncertainty from a partner would create anxious pursuit rather than considered withdrawal. I'm not that kind of target, not out of arrogance. I have plenty of uncertainty in other areas of my life, about Hartwell's long-term trajectory, about what I want the next chapter of my personal life to look like, about any number of things a thoughtful person is uncertain about. But my sense of myself in a relationship is not contingent on whether my partner performs enthusiasm. I don't need to be chased or convinced or kept slightly off balance to stay engaged. I stay engaged when things are real. And the moment they become performance, I exit. She'd sense that quality in me and try to crack it. And when she couldn't, I think she kept going not because she expected it to work, but because conceding defeat felt worse than escalating. That's a losing position either way, but it's a human one. I hold no particular grudge about it. What I carry forward is simpler than any of that, the clarity about who I am in these situations. I've always known that I don't react in anger, and I don't plead, and I don't fold. But it's one thing to know those things about yourself in the abstract, and another to have them tested over a sustained period in a real situation with real social stakes, and to come out on the other side having been exactly who you thought you were. That's worth something. More, I'd argue, than winning the argument. It's a Thursday evening as I'm sitting with all of this, late autumn now, and Britain has gone the golden gray that it gets in this season. The leaves down and the sky clear and the air sharp in a way that always makes me feel like I can think more cleanly. The Hartwell office has been quiet for an hour. My team long since headed home, and I have a glass of water and a contract brief in front of me that I'm going to return to in a few minutes. My phone shows a message from a number I haven't saved. I open it. It's brief. I've been doing some thinking. I handle things poorly. I'm sorry. No name. But I know the handwriting, so to speak, the careful construction of an apology that concedes the minimum. It's Cassie. I read it once. Then again. Then I put the phone down on the desk next to the contract brief. There's a version of this moment where I craft a response, where I say something gracious and measured and quietly triumphant. There's another version where I don't respond at all, which is its own kind of statement. There's a version where I simply acknowledge it without elaboration. I sit with it for a while, the way I sat with the video on that Thursday evening months ago, giving the moment the space it deserves before deciding anything. Then I type, I appreciate you saying that. I hope things are going well for you. I send it. Put the phone face down. Return to the contract. Some resolutions are quiet. They don't announce themselves. They arrive in a muted Thursday evening with water on the desk and work to finish, and they sit in the chest like a small, clean weight. Not heavy, not light, just exactly what it is. I pick up the brief and start reading. The next contract Hartwell closes is with a logistics company called Terrain Forward, our biggest partnership yet. We sign it on a cold Friday morning in early winter, and afterward I take my team to a lunch at a place called Cops and Company on the east side of the city. There are 11 of us around a long table, and the food is good and the conversation is easy. And somewhere around the second hour, my deputy director, a meticulous woman named Harriet Voss, raises a glass and says, "To another year of Hartwell prevailing quietly." Everyone laughs. It's an inside reference, something I say, apparently often enough that it's become the team's shorthand for the way we operate. We don't make noise. We do the work. We hold the line on our standards. We exit when something isn't working, and we enter when the conditions are right. I raise my glass. Quietly, I agree. Outside, the first snow of the season has begun. It falls without announcement, the way the best things usually do, settling over Carver Street and the rooftops of Brennan in a clean, even layer that makes everything look, for a moment, like exactly what it is.
Thanks for listening.